Part 3. He had no idea where he was. It was like he had been hurled into a nightmare. The title of the Four Knights, the title belonging to the mightiest warriors of the Baharuth Empire, now seemed so shockingly superficial. How pathetic a creature was he, to be so proud of such an insignificant little thing. That was how great of a shock he had received. Nimble could hear the sound of subdued weeping. It was the sobbing of people who had been pushed past their limits by fear and unease. It was a childish no, it was the agonized wailing of men who had been reduced to children. The ones who wept were the Imperial Knights. He heard people beg, "Just run away." That was the prayer of the knights who had with eyes full of pity watched that hideous carnage swallow up their fellow human beings. So wretched was this tragedy that even the enemies of the royal army, the Imperial Knights, offered up prayers for them. They prayed that at least some would survive. The more, the better. They had come here to kill the enemy. However, no human being could remain unmoved and not feel pity when they witnessed the massacre taking place in front of them. Anyone who could remain unmoved would be a fiend with a man's face, an inhuman being. In addition, Nimble and the knights realized that this could not be dismissed as a matter of us versus them. Certainly, from the point of view of the kingdom against the empire, this disaster was happening to them. Quote, "But when you looked at it from the perspective of men against monsters, this brutal slaughter was happening to us. Well then, I think it's time." All eyes went to Ains as he spoke quietly. There were 60,000 people present, and his voice was not loud enough to reach all of them. However, they could tell when the people beside him turned their heads. And once they knew that the faces of their neighbors were turned to Ains Ulgaun, they too followed suit. After all, every move and gesture made by the man who had orchestrated this nightmare Ains Ulgaun filled all present with uncontrollable terror. Ains slowly removed his mask. He exposed his skinless, fleshless, polished white skull to the world. If the circumstances had been different, perhaps they might have thought he was wearing a mask under his mask. However, as they saw this, the hearts of Nimble and all the knights of the Empire sank. They understood that this was his true face. That Ains Ulgaun was a monster. That was because they had a premonition. Anyone who could wield such power could not be human. Ains slowly spread his arms. He looked like he was embracing a friend, or was it a demon spreading its wings? In the eyes of all who were watching, he seemed to double in size. In the silence interrupted only by the anguished screams of the kingdom's soldiers in the distance, Ains's still, small voice rang out with exceptional clarity. Applause, then. What is he saying? Nimble thought as he stared at Ains with his mouth open. Everyone who could hear him thought the same thing, and as Ains's words were whispered throughout the army, more and more people turned their eyes to him. Then, when everyone's attention was on him, he spoke again. A round of applause, in celebration of my supreme power. The first to applaud was Mare, who stood by Ains's side, opposite Nimble. As though sparked by it, the scattered sounds of clapping began rising up from the soldiers, until it became a thunderous ovation. Of course, they were not truly cheering for him. Nobody wanted to applaud a person who brought this kind of cruel butchery with him. This was not war. It was slaughter. A massacre. Only, nobody present could speak these words. Nobody dared. Their earth-shaking applause was the sum of all the knights' fears. And then the intensity of the riotous applause, which all present thought could not get any greater, rose several more notches. That was because one of the Dark Young had slowly changed its course. It would soon reach the Imperial army. Shouts of praise rang out, to match the applause. The Imperial Knights cried out in praise of Ains Ulgaun. They screamed until their throats bled. Yet, the Dark Young did not slow its pace. And so, the knights cried out even louder. They thought the beast was approaching because he was not pleased with their volume. But still, it did not stop. And thus, their tightly wound nerves snapped. Nobody knew who started it. It might have just been the wavering of a single knight. However, that was enough for the terror which filled them beyond their limits to burst forth. Aye! The soul-wrenching scream echoed throughout the ranks and shook the Imperial army. One of the monsters which had trampled the royal army underfoot was bearing down on them. This abnormal situation so terrified some of the Imperial knights that they abandoned their unmoving horses and fled for their lives. After seeing the hellish sight from just now, even those who lacked vivid imaginations knew exactly what would happen when it was their turn under that beast's hooves. And of course fear was contagious. While less than 100 people fled at first, that number swelled within moments, until it was a flight of 60,000. Yes, the Imperial army had fallen into panic, their regimentation in tatters. It was a disgraceful rout. The knights had obviously been taught how to fall back in good order. However, they no longer had the luxury of adhering to such discipline. If it would let them leave this place 1 second faster, if they could move 1 step more in flight toward a safe place, they would push down their comrades in front of them with all their might and flee. When shoved from behind, it was unavoidable that people would lose their balance and fall. And once they fell down, the panic-driven throng behind them would not give them the chance to rise. The ones who fell would be trampled by the ones behind them. Even if they wore metal armor, everyone else wore metal armor as well. They would be stamped into a single fused mass of metal and meat. Scenes like this were happening everywhere. The Imperial army's casualties were not caused by the enemy, but by themselves. Nimble did not know what to do next, and he hesitated. He wanted to run as well. However, he could not do so, and not all the knights had escaped, in any event. As he looked back across the formation, he saw a scant few people rearing, stock still atop their horses. They had not remained because of their fear. Rather, it was because they were mesmerized by the sight of overwhelming power, and had forgotten themselves in their excitement. For instance, normal people would flee when they saw a huge tornado sweeping in toward them. However, there were certain beings who admired the beauty of the tornado and stood still even though they realized it would claim their lives. Those that remained could be considered deviants. The Dark Young arrived before Ains, bent its knees, and lowered its tentacles. It was probably displaying its submission. Nimble smiled, his face twitching, as the monster acted in a decidedly non-monstrous way. The Dark Young's body should have been splattered in fresh blood, but it was nowhere to be seen because it had already been absorbed by its skin. It wrapped its tentacles around Ains's waist, then extended several more to firmly grip his body before raising him up. Then, it placed him on its head. I believe the original plan was that I would cast a spell upon the enemy, and then the Imperial army would follow up with a charge, but it would seem you have no intention to act. Nimble had nothing to say. Ains was right. The Empire had broken the terms of the agreement which they themselves had made with the king of their allied country. However, one could not blame the knights for losing their nerve. Nimble would defend them even in front of Jepniv, because he knew the overwhelming terror which had gripped them. I have no intention of rebuking you. I understand you're concerned that if you launch an assault, there is a chance you may be trampled along with the enemy. Truthfully speaking, if that happened, I would be hard-pressed to explain those deaths to your emperor. Well, in that case, I guess I'll handle your part of the job as well. Nimble looked to the company of the undead, which had remained still all this time. Will those undead troops make an assault, then? Oh, no, I'll let these lambs handle it since it's such a rare chance for them to do so. I simply performed some light cleaning up. Mayor, do not lower your guard. Yes, yes. Please leave it to me, Ains Sama. Nimble was speechless. He said he would press the attack. Him, in person, the one who had cast a spell like that. His tone suggested that he did not intend to let anyone return alive from this battlefield. It was clear that his hunger for carnage was insatiable. To think, "It's not enough. Is he a devil?" Although he was muttering to himself, Nimble's words were louder than he thought, and Ains turned his terrible visage on him from where he was seated atop the dark young. He shook his head at the quivering Nimble. "Do not be mistaken. I am undead." What Ains must have been trying to say was that he was not a demon that exalted the idea of evil, but an undead being that hated the living. As such, he would not permit a single soldier of the kingdom to escape. He would take even more lives. That was the most likely answer, and also the most disastrous one. If Ains wanted to slay everything that lived because he was undead, then it was possible that his sights might someday be set on the Empire, which was filled with the living. No, that was sure to happen in the future. What should I do? Assaulted by confusion and fear, Nimble lacked the ability to focus, and he did not hear Ains's last whispered words. "And it seems I have found my target." The headquarters of King Ranposa III was located in the center of the royal army. It was surrounded by countless banners belonging to numerous nobles of the kingdom of Riestais. Although there had been many nobles gathered here before, only a few remained here. Most of them had already fled, and only a scant few remained in this camp. Of course, the king had no intention of blaming the court nobles for running away. "You lot, leave me behind and run. This is no time for jokes. Your Majesty, please flee with all haste. Once it has its eye on us, we'll have no chance to survive." The speaker was Gazef's subordinate, the vice-captain of the warrior band. "How can I run away, as the king? Even if your Majesty stays, there is nothing you can do. Should you not return to Erantal and plan the counter-attack?" Ranposa III smiled bitterly. It hurt to listen to those words. "That's right. Even if I stay here, there is nothing left for me to do." It was impossible to rally his broken, rooted army under these circumstances. It was not just Ranposa III who could not do it. Even the famed generals of old would have found this unreasonable task to be impossible. "Your Majesty, there's no time. Listen up, you lot. You must bring His Majesty home even if you have to tie him up." Gazef's subordinates leapt into action. Wasting more time would endanger not only himself but the people around him. With that in mind, Ranposa III made his decision and rose to his feet. "All right, let's go. But what will change if we flee now?" The footfalls shook the ground like an earthquake as they drew closer. But even under these extreme circumstances, Ranposa III remained calm. It was a far cry from the chaotic noises the nobles had made. "First of all, it's impossible. If we try to flee on horseback, it'll come after us. It seems to target large groups of fleeing soldiers first. Therefore, there's only one way for us to be saved." It was only now that Ranposa III realized why they had urged the nobles to mount up and flee in groups just now. "So all we can do is run on foot." Some of the warriors began removing and discarding their armor. "These men will carry your Majesty and flee. And what about you?" Not everyone had removed their armor. For instance, the vice-captain was still wearing his. "I'll act as a mounted distraction and flee in the opposite direction." Ranposa III saw the bright smiles on the warriors' faces, and realized that they had made their peace with death. "Impossible. You are the treasures of our kingdom. No matter what, you must survive. I still need you to serve my descendants. Of course. Although we intend to be bait, we do not intend to die." That was a lie. They were planning to die. Or rather, they had accepted that death was their destiny. Ranposa III tried to think of something to convince them, but he could not speak. In the face of the warriors' smiles, everything he came up with sounded insincere and shallow. The warriors around him helped remove Ranposa III's armor. A warrior in pure white armor stepped forward. He was Clym, his daughter Renna's sole subordinate, who had given everything he had in her service. Allow me to assist in the diversion. Although we don't know if these monsters have eyes, but if we wave our flags non-stop, we should be able to draw their attention. And this armor should be quite eye-catching. Clym held the kingdom's flag in his hand. It had been dirtied by the footprints of fleeing soldiers, and it seemed to summarize their current situation. Then I'll go too. Beside Clym was Brain Unglaus. Apparently he was a first-rate warrior who was the equal of his trusted vassal, Gazef Stronov. Brain had entered this war as Renna's subordinate. In other words, he was in the same position as Clym. Are you sure? Strictly speaking, you are not exactly the princess subordinate. Well, don't worry about that. During the demonic disturbance we were on the front lines, and somehow we still made it back alive. This time, we'll just hope that luck is with us. And we hope that luck is with you too. The gods will not watch in silence. During that disturbance, a hero came to save us. I trust they will change our fate too. Before Ranposa III, Brain and the vice-captain touched their knuckles together to bid him farewell. How did it end up like this? Where had it all gone wrong? Ranposa III moaned softly. In all likelihood, none of the men in front of him would survive. The vice-captain and Clym would die as bait. And he did not know what had happened to Gazef, who had vanished into the chaos after saying he intended to stop the Dark Young. His eyes burned. Forgive me, he wanted to say. They were going to act as decoys for an old man, throwing their lives and futures away for him. But he could not say that. They probably knew they were going to die, but they were going to cling to life as hard as they could. In that case, return safely to Erantal, and I shall grant you any reward you desire. Clym and Brain paused mid-step and turned around. There's no need for a reward, Your Majesty. I exist to aid Renna's armor. How could I dare ask for a reward? As for what I want, well, I'd like this kid I'm interested in here to marry the prettiest princess in the country. Well, that is a lavish reward. Brain-san, what are you saying? Well, we'll have to start by giving the kid a lordship. Work hard. Then you must return alive no matter what, Clym-kun. Clym's frightened eyes and open mouth no longer had the warrior spirit they had possessed just now. The king, however, had forgotten everything and allowed a bright smile onto his face. Then, we'll be off, Your Majesty. I'll leave it to you. The now unarmored Ranposa III was borne aloft by a soldier. Your Majesty. Even now, our flight is still a matter of luck. If the worst happens, I pray you will forgive us. That's fine. It was my decision to use your idea. If it fails due to misfortune, then I will have no complaints. Then, Your Majesty, may we meet again in Erantal. The vice-captain galloped off on his horse. As though it was waiting for him, one of the Dark Young changed its direction. All right, let's go while everyone's drawing it off.